So, thank you very much for your patience, and thank you so much for coming. It's really, really good. I'm really excited. Um, I've got, I'm Ben, as Jill said. I lived at the centre, at Lamrim Buddhist Centre in Wales for about 2 years, um, way back in 1983, and it was very early then. But it was a really important, and one of the most amazing things for me was, as a 19-year-old, was that I had plenty of time to learn, and I was very enthused to learn. And Geshe Lao, who was then Geshe Damchi Yonten, who I have a photo of him here. This is later on. Was able to give me his undivided time and attention during the working day, and what he did was to teach me not the magic and mystery of Tibet, but the how to hoover and how to clean windows and how to be a good person. And all of these related directly to the Lamrim, which is what he was teaching us every week. And then as that progressed, I began to realize that what he was teaching was the real magic, the real mystery of Tibet, not the sort of imaginary ones that we have, not the Harry Potter, so much as a deeper truth, which was absolutely beautiful. So what I want to do today is to talk a little bit about the Lam Rim Chenmo, which is the text that we're going to be going through, and also to say that on my side, I'm really dependent upon you as well, because I've got a lot to learn on this. It's not like I'm some great enlightened master, but I think as a fellow student, maybe there's something that I could share and bring home that will be resonant and work with you as well, and that's really what I'm looking for. Je Lama Tsong-kha-pa wrote this in a long time ago, so nearly 700 years ago, so, and he was really writing for monks, and he was writing for people who'd already were committed Buddhists and very experienced Buddhists. So what I want to do really is to briefly go into some of the basics, preambles of these, because the other thing was is that everybody who was taking part in these lessons had already had some training in the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path of Buddhism, and also even in some sort of training in understanding background philosophy, which fortunately we don't have to worry about. What we do need to know is that this is a Mahayana teaching. Now, it's beautifully based upon a man called Dipankara Atisha, who was an Indian man, who was invited to Tibet in order to revitalize the Buddhist tradition. And he wrote a book called Lamp and the Path, which is very short, very easy to read. And in that, what he did was to show how all the different varieties of Buddhism, including the Buddhism that's taught in the Pali tradition, as well as other sutras and so on, all work together. It's not as if there's this school and that school and that school, and these sutras are not right for us, and those sutras are good for us. And so he was very, very inclusive. He was an early proponent of inclusivity. And Je Rinpoche, Lama Tsongkhapa, was so inspired by this, especially through the Kadampa tradition, which is this tradition that was founded by Atisha's students, that he wrote this his basic guide to the path of practitioner's path to enlightenment on that basis. So one of the things I'd like to say about it is that this is very, very much promoting inclusivity the whole way through it, especially in terms of the way in which we relate to Buddha Dharma. We don't have this sort of polemic idea of saying, oh, they're not so good. And this is built into the Lamrim, and it's really, really beautiful. It's one of the things that inspired His Holiness the Dalai Lama to be able to meet and share his teachings with all of the different Buddhist traditions in the world, and even the non-Buddhist traditions in the world as well. So that's really one of the wonderful qualities of that, and it's actually mentioned in the text. He talks about that as a part of it, the greatness of the teaching. But before I really start, and I'm sort of really keen to get into this and so on, I think what I want to do is to sort of say, what is it? Why are we doing this? And I know most of you are already practitioners and Buddhists, but it's still, again, a good question to say, you know, I call myself Buddhist. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a Buddhist? And I remember being asked by Geshe-la this question, even after years of teaching, and I said this, and he just laughed at me, and I said that, and he laughed again and said, oh, no. So I was like, okay, well, what is it? And he said, there are many different answers to this question, but what he was saying was, well, if you look at the word Buddha, it means awakened one, and a Buddhist is somebody who's actually interested in being awakened. And that really, in a sense, is all it means to be a Buddhist, is that we value enlightenment. We recognize enlightenment as a possibility, and we recognize it as being something that we can achieve, and we value it enough to actually walk that path. So what we're really talking about is the basis of the Four Noble Truths. In a very simple sense, we see the idea of the cessation, the removal of all suffering from our mind stream. We recognize that there's a path to it. Therefore, we come to the conclusion that we should walk that path. That is what makes us a Buddhist. So if we look at it that way, then a part of that is to say, what we're wanting to do with our lives, or what we're recognizing in our lives, is that what we want to engage in is enlightening activity. So we want to do what we can to enlighten ourselves, but also enlighten everybody else. And this is the Mahayana tradition, the Great Path tradition, Shinta Chenpo in Tibetan, which sort of shows the antiquity of the Tibetan tradition, because Shinta means the wooden horse, so chariot. So it's the big wooden horse, not the little wooden horse. But it's normally translated as the great vehicle rather than the sort of the big chariot. But what we're saying really is, what is the big chariot? What makes it big isn't because it's somehow larger, wider, or whatever, but because everybody is included, including ourselves. Everybody is included. So we don't leave. It's sort of like, you know, leave no man behind, leave no one behind, or whatever. So this sort of thing is what we're looking at, is the idea of saying, I want to dedicate my life, everything in my life, to this journey, which is to say, I'm working for everybody. It's a team player, if you like, but it's also much more than that, because that team is like the family, our family, extending to all beings, without exception. And that last thing, without exception, is really important. We've got to find a way of letting go of any sense of reluctance or antipathy, or fury or distress at everybody. Everybody. This is a part of the Bodhisattva requirement. So on that basis, we have this inclusive teaching provided to us is to help us, to enable us develop ourselves along the Mahayana path that we're committed to. We recognize enlightenment. We recognize the Mahayana enlightenment of Buddhahood. And we see that as being something that we ourselves have chosen or choose to take part in. And this book, this text written, albeit in the 14th century, provides us with the ability for us to actually do that, which is just remarkable. It's not filled with lots of aphorisms or things that are very good for YouTube, But what it does do is provide us with an insight, a really good, clear insight into how to construct and to live our lives in a way that heads us into enlightenment. So the question of what is a Buddha and what is not a Buddha, I think really at the moment this is something that we can ask ourselves and consider. Later on in book one, we talk in some depth about the qualities of enlightenment and what it looks like. But I think right now, and it's traditional to start off a session with a short meditation on developing the motivation. And a motivation is normally called bodhicitta motivation, which is to say the reason why I want to take part in this is not for anything other than to help me in my journey to enlightenment, to Buddhahood. And the basis of that is not just myself, but everyone. So all I want to do is to improve myself, to develop myself, to be the best person I can for all people, right? So not just my own suffering, but remove all obstacles for all beings. And this really is just an amazing thing to be able to do. So I think that's great. So what we're going to do is there's a traditional Sangye Chudangma, which most of you know, but also is not just to say these words or to do a ritual, but really to think about it, to say, you know, what I want to do on my side right now, even if Ben's going to talk rubbish, yeah, and Ben gets all confused about what he says or whatever, on my side, I'm going to do what I can to spend the next few minutes, in the next hour or so, developing that sincere wish to make use of this moment, of these moments, to try to find out, to help me in my journey to enlightenment, or towards Buddhahood, or to understanding Buddhahood, such that I can help everybody. And even if I find Buddhahood difficult, at least improve myself such that I can help everybody. And that gives us a brilliant way of being able to say, at least I'm going to try my very hardest to use this time. Okay, so let's rather than go through a ritual tradition, let's do that just in meditation. Okay. Thank you. So then what I'm planning on doing with this session, apart from going pretty quickly into the Lamrim itself, is go through it, and what I'm hoping to do is for you to be able to consider and think what I'm saying. If you have the Lamrim text, then it's good to be able to follow it. If you don't have it, it doesn't matter. Writing notes is useful. And then afterwards, what I'm hoping to do is if you've got any energy left, then we could have a much more open discussion group. But there's quite a lot of material to cover. And so I think it's better for me to actually do a presentation, and then we look at doing question and answers later. We can see how that goes anyway. The other thing is, it's quite important really for you to sort of consider what's being said, where there are mistakes being made. Those mistakes are me, but what I'm trying to do is to express what I've learned from my teachers, and what they taught is a continual lineage of people, of mind, a lineage of mind that goes all the way back through to Buddha. And for me, my primary teacher was Geshe Damchala here. And his teacher, and his teacher, and his teacher go all the way back to Lama Tsong-kha-pa, who actually wrote the text. and he went all the way back to Atisha, and Atisha went all the way through Nalanda to Asanga and Nagarjuna, and they themselves went all the way back to Buddha. So there's a very strong lineage of mind which is important that we're looking at, but not just looking at text. And my difficulty is that I am not very, very realized at all. But what I hope to do is to be able to share whatever I can. And rather than judge me and say, oh, you know, oh, Ben's made a mistake, Ben's, that's absolutely fine if I've made a mistake, but to don't make the mistake of judging the teaching, because the teaching is fine. My ability is maybe less. I have a tendency to speak very fast, I know, but I'll do my best. Well, let's see how it goes, right? So Lama Tsongkhapa starts off in Sanskrit. This is the first page of the text here, and in a pecha form, like this. And this is in Tibetan, in a Tibetan woodcut. And you can probably see on the center is Buddha, the historic Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and then here is this is Manjushri, and then this is Maitreya. So this is really to do with the aspect of wisdom and compassion. And his opening phrase is Namo Guru Manju Goshiya. This is Sanskrit, and it's saying, I take refuge in Manjushri, the manifestation of Buddha in the wisdom form. This is important because Lama Tsongkhapa recognized that Manjushri himself was his teacher, his teacher. So he first of all gives praise to him, and then I'm not going to read this all in Tibetan. Very, very, just the first verse, because it's very beautiful. Punso gelek jik jiwe trimbeku tai jiwe rekon bayesong maru sheja jijin jik pe tuk shakya tso de la gonchat sel. So the fact that he wrote in Sanskrit and then into Tibetan, and then I'm going to read in English, sort of really reflects how the tradition of the Lamrim comes to us. It comes from India, not from Tibet, but it comes via Tibet, and then it comes to us in English. Now, this translation was done by many translators over many years, of which a list is at the front. And when I learnt, when I was taught the Lamrim, this text wasn't available. There were no texts, translations available at the time. But it's been incredibly useful for me to go back through and read this, having been taught it from by Geshe-la. But also what I learned was what's not in the text and what he also added to it to illustrate and to bring to life some of these points. So this text that I read in Tibetan was, I bow my head to the chief of the Shakyas. This is Shakyamuni Buddha, whose body was formed by 10 million perfect virtues, whose speech fulfills the hopes of limitless beings, whose mind sees precisely all objects of knowledge. So we see straight away that the primary point about this is that we'll see again and again in terms of the way in which things are talked about. There are three bases of activity in this tradition: the body, the speech, and the mind, which represent the three forms of actions that are available for us to do. So it's not as if we're saying that that's all there is, but what we're looking at is a way of being able to consider the emphasis, especially when it comes to what we can do, how we change the world, is based on the Buddha, speech and mind. So he says his general job is that what he wants to do is to explain how we are led to Buddhahood by the way of the stages of the path to enlightenment. And he also wants to show that all the key points of the Buddha's teachings are actually laid out and a part of that journey. So what he's saying is that the Buddha didn't just talk about anything. In fact, Buddhism isn't at all about trying to explain the universe. What it's about is the motivation is about bringing us to, bringing us to enlightenment. So everything that he taught is in one way or another assisting us to enlightenment. And also, he says that particularly important is that this text is linked very strongly to Nagarjuna and Asanga. Now, Nagarjuna was the person, the Indian teacher who introduced what's known as the middle way philosophy, or the middle way school of understanding. And what's beautiful about his understanding of emptiness and the way in which he talks about emptiness is that it's not a philosophical or intellectual feat. In fact, it's very, very straightforward and simple, although it takes us time to let go of our preconceptions about that. But that's something we'll deal with later. And Asanga was the person who gave Chandragomin Asanga received instructions on the Mahayana path and developing of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, which is what we were talking about earlier on when we were meditating on setting our mind correctly. And that all of these are primarily for helping us to achieve Buddhahood, and specifically the word he uses in this case is omniscience. So in terms of Buddhahood, one of the things is said to be one of the qualities which is good for us, and the qualities that are good for everybody else. And one of the qualities that's good for us is omniscience, the ability to understand and know everything without any obstacle whatsoever. And the benefit for others is that we spontaneously, without any effort at all, are able to meet their needs and help them on their journey to enlightenment whenever there's any contact with them. So we're able to meet our wishes, which is to do that. But at the same time, we also have some side benefits, if you like, including this omniscience and also a state of bliss. And also, then he says, this also comprises the stages practiced by the three types of person, which we'll go into more detail. In fact, it comes in quite late, strangely enough, where he talks about the three types of people. I think it comes in book 2. But what he's talking about is the idea that different people have different abilities or different scopes, but it sounds like initially that we're talking about different types of person, and the way in which it's translated doesn't help in that case, but we're not. We're really talking about different levels of motivation that we as practitioners are able to achieve at any given moment. So I'll talk very briefly about this because it really is very much about what Atisha was trying to express, is that sometimes really when life's hard, it's very hard to think about everybody else in the world, the universe. It's very hard to take on a strong motivation to help benefit all beings. But within that, sometimes we are able to still say, well, no, it's okay, I still want to be enlightened. I'm working on that, so I can do that. I just can't quite get to understand, keep my bodhicitta. There are other times when even that's like just too hard for us. And at those times, what we want to do is just to be able to sustain or achieve happiness, base happiness. So we start off understanding more easily the needs of being able to keep our mind happy. Hopefully you're all still happy listening to me. But also recognizing death awareness, for instance. So death awareness is one of those things that's very, very hard not to understand. We often put it to one side. We don't want to know about it, but it's pretty obvious. And in fact, by the time you reach, my age, I'm probably one of the younger ones here, but by the time you're in your 50s, death has been around you all the time. In fact, you're feeling lucky if you made it this far sometimes. So that aspect is very true. Is that essentially the earlier, what's called the lower scopes, or the simple scopes, are ones which are much more easily realized, much more easy to achieve. So this is the way in which we talk about the three types of person, really talking about the three abilities or the three levels that we can go on. There are also other traditions where there is 4 or 5 and so on, and it's not necessarily an intellectual division. It's just helping us to understand how accessible something is at a given time. And the way in which Lamrim is taught is very much how it starts off with the easy ones, the easiest to pick up, the easiest for us to digest and to use and to inform us and to make more out of our lives. So this is really absolutely relevant to us. We cannot possibly begin to expect ourselves to have 24 hours a day of perfect bodhicitta just arising naturally, right? It's just not going to happen. So but what we do hope to do is to be able to say from moment to moment that at least what we're doing is not causing harm, not allowing our mind to go off onto a fury or anger or distress. So it's those sorts of things we're working towards. But generally, we're also trying, when we do have the opportunity, to develop that universal compassion and love. And that's really, really what's so beautiful about this. So he then talks a little bit about Atisha. And the reason why he talks about Atisha is because he sees this text very much as an exposition or a commentary or a development of Atisha's lamp on the path. And what he wants to say is that, in fact, the lamp of the path itself was based on the ornament of clear knowledge. It was the Abhisamayalankara, which was given by Maitreya to a Sangha. Maitreya is the future Buddha, and a Sangha had a relationship with him after many years. He was in a cave, and anyway, he had a difficult time, but he managed in the end to have a very powerful rapport with Maitreya. So when we move on to Atisha, and I'm going to do this very quickly, it talks about where he was born. It was in Bengal, and at the time there was a place called Vikramanipura, and he was meant to be one of the princes, or certainly one of the aristocracy of this area. And he was clever. He was a very, very good scholar as a child. And he'd already learnt, in fact, he wrote a commentary which still exists on the Bhagavad Gita. So he wasn't necessarily just, at the time, he wasn't a scholar just of Buddhism, he was a scholar also of Hinduism. He then met one of his main teachers, who was called Rahula Gupta, who was a tantric practitioner. And he developed his tantric skills and had thought that he'd perfected them completely, and he was sort of a little bit proud. He said, "Well, I'm fantastic at this. I can do this." And he then had a dream where all the dakinis, all the deities of the mandala said, and he realized he knew nothing. So he then wanted to develop his studies more, but he was also encouraged to become a monk, because essentially he felt that he wasn't able to continue his teachings outside of that, and he became a monk. He received and was then given instruction. I think it was Mahasamgika tradition, but some of you may know better, and I'm not going to argue with you. And then he was taught Dhammarakshita. Dhammarakshita is famous, and he was taught the Vibhasha, which is, a lot of this is about Vinaya, the monastic rules and so on. So then, having done that, he also developed a strong bodhisattva practice. He went abroad and that had an incredible journey abroad. Does it mention it here? I think maybe it doesn't. It's a Lingpa. And survived a storm and took the Bodhisattva vow and came back, and then was invited to Tibet, where he taught. And one of the things he did in order to introduce Buddhism in its simplest sense to the Tibetans was the composition of the lamp for the path to enlightenment, which was then used for this text itself. And that's really what this was talking about. So I'm not going to go into too much details on this, but I've already talked about him a little bit. But basically, he provided both a renewal of the introduction of the Vinaya for the monastic tradition, but also of the Asanga's Bodhisattva tradition. And he didn't do very much in the way of Tantra or teaching Tantra, but he was a Tantric practitioner. And his students would call him the Refuge Lama because he wouldn't give initiation, he would give refuge, which is entry into Buddhism. There was lots of stories about him. There was the king of Tibet, when he was invited, was like, "Oh, Atisha, it's so good you're here, and you come and teach us all the time." And they were really doing this out of some sort of like, "We've got the best teacher," and so on. And he saw this, and he's like, "No, I want to spend time with the horses, because they're good students. They understand what I'm doing." And he was like looking after the horses. And they were like, "You've got to come and teach." It's like, no, I've got to look after the horses. So he waited really until they were willing to drop their pride a bit and sort of recognize that they didn't tell him what to do. He chose to do what it was when it was ready. So he's like this. He's quite firm, but very, very good person. So he was a huge inspiration for many, many teachers, including Lama Tsong-kha-pa, who wrote this book. So within that, this is where we talk about a little bit about the greatness of the Lam Rim Chenmo, some of the qualities of this which come from the Lamp of the Path. And one of them is that understanding this particular text helps us to recognize that although all the teachings may appear to be contradictory, in fact, the Dharma, in fact, they are free of contradiction. And the reasoning through that comes later, which I've already talked about, however, is that it's to do with the particular scope of one's mind at any given point. Secondly, to understand that all scriptures, or all the Dharma, or the teachings of Buddha, are instructions for practice, and practice here is to enlightenment. Thirdly, it's very easy to understand, and this is what I found too, to understand really what Buddhism is about, and what it means, and what the path to enlightenment is about, and what we would do. So understand the intent of Buddha is what he has written here. And the fourth point is that it frees us from great wrongdoing. So one of the great misdemeanors is to criticize Buddha Dharma. So he goes into a little bit of detail here, and he says primarily that when we say that we recognize the teachings are free of contradiction, what we're doing is we understand that they're the path, that all of the teachings are available to us to be a path by which we become a Buddha. I'm slightly repeating myself because I'm so excited by some of the things that I've jumped ahead. Some are main parts, some are main points, and some are various branches or ancillaries, but they're all there really primarily for this purpose. And the other thing is, and this is something he talks about too, he says, some people aren't ready to be bodhisattvas. You have Pali tradition who are not ready to be bodhisattvas. They follow the Sravaka path, or you have the Pracheka path, But for us, if we're bodhisattvas, if we're following the Mahayana, even those parts of the Sravaka that we normally would not practice, we still need to know how to practice. And the reason for that is because as bodhisattvas, we need to teach in accordance with the abilities of our students. And this is really important in terms of thinking about how we work, for instance, in interfaith dialogue. For me to talk, if I'm talking to a Christian, for me to say, oh, God doesn't exist, how does that help that person? All it does is create some sense of disconnect. But what I would want to do is to help encourage that part of their practice that we share, developing loving kindness, developing an awareness of being good, develop a continuity of practice. These things are valuable, and they're available to me if I use the language of the person I'm talking to. So to go into saying, oh, God doesn't exist, or this, that, or I think that, or you think that, doesn't help us. And this isn't a bodhisattva path. In this sense, it doesn't help us in any sense. It doesn't help them in any sense. So we have to say, well, if I really want to be able to help somebody, a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Theravadan, I need to know the language which they speak in order to do that. And therefore, for me to criticize or to demean or to dismiss that which is a valid path for somebody else is making a mistake. It's not just Buddhism, it's also other paths. Again, I said, there are many things within the Lam Rim tradition which shows us inclusivity and the importance of inclusivity. And this is very much what Geshe was saying. He used to be, when somebody would come in and say, oh, those bloody Muslims, he was like, you can't say that. Some people have a very bad view, wrong view, and they make mistakes. But there are many people, many Muslims who are very, very good, very powerful practitioners, much better than you, he'd say. So it's like, So anyway, so we have to do I miss him so much. Anyway, so yeah, we have to think really carefully of how we can help in accordance to the language of the other. And if we don't know that language, better to say nothing, zip lip, is like he used to say. So you don't need to talk so much, right? It's okay to listen, learn. Never a problem. It's like saying, oh, I can't say very much about it. I'm sorry, I don't know very much. That's okay. Nobody's going to be complaining. Anyway, most people, they're very happy to talk about their own views. Right? So this is easy to do anyway. If you're in interfaith dialogue or you're talking with others, to think, okay, well, actually, maybe think bodhisattva way rather than just, I'm proud, I'm Buddhist. Right? It doesn't work. It's not what we're about. So for us, we choose our path. We choose our path. We follow our path. We're loyal to the path. We recognize Buddha. We recognize Buddhahood. We recognize the Buddhist path. But that also means, this is what he's saying here, is that we need to understand that the paths that other people follow are also valid. Sometimes they're not so easy for them to achieve the final points of being enlightened, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't have a huge amount to offer in terms of developing at least high rebirth and many, many other benefits. So there's no reason, if that's the path. For instance, a few years ago, the Jehovah's Witnesses came to my front door. Yeah, I think nearly everybody has had that experience. So they came, and this really big woman, and she was saying, oh, it would be how wonderful it would be if you came to a church. And I said, look, I come from a different covenant. I wasn't going to say I'm Buddhist, because then she would say, oh, you're a devil worshipper or something, which has happened when I was a bit more naive. So I said, oh yes, I follow a different covenant, but it's very good. And they think, oh, covenant, that means he's Christian. So that's what they said. And then rather than sort of having them tell me about how to, Watchtower, I said, do you think it would be a good idea for us to, do you really think it's ideal for all of us, the whole world, to have the same faith? I mean, that dress looks very good on you, but it wouldn't look so good on me. And she was laughing so much, right? So in that sense, it was like, it made her think a little bit about maybe we do need to think about other religions. We don't just have to think sort of, it's my way or nothing, you know, or it's hell or whatever. So those sorts of things are not so hard, you know, but it makes a huge difference for our practice and our understanding of the practice. Maybe you all know this. I'm really sorry if you don't, but anyway, for me it's good. So that's why when we're recognizing, when we're learning as bodhisattvas, we don't criticize paths. We don't criticize, certainly not Buddha's path. We recognize that they are valid paths to Buddhahood, especially within the Buddhist tradition. And even those paths which are non-Buddhist, we recognize they're valid spiritual paths. And that's fine. I mean, that's generally better than, and those people who are not on any paths, then we look at talking to them about their ethics. I'm an atheist, fine, that's great. Being an atheist is very strong. But finding ethics within that is also important. Finding a way of being able to say, what do we share? What can we share? And how can we encourage people to think about being a little bit better, doing a bit more, thinking about the community, thinking beyond personal ambition? That's our job, right? As bodhisattvas, as a part of our practice, that's our job. Or we can just live in like me. I mean, I spend most of my life living in a cave in the middle of the city, not talking to anybody at all. But except for the Jehovah's Witnesses. Anyway, so yeah, it says here, the Mother of Conquerors, the 18,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, is one of the really powerful Perfection of Wisdom Sutras says. And this is quoting the sutra. He does this the whole way through. It's not just made up. He says, bodhisattvas should produce all paths, whatever it is a path of the Shravaka, Pratyeka, Buddha, it doesn't, all should know all paths. They should also be able to perform the deeds of these paths and bring them to completion. Now, obviously, when there are things which are in conflict with bodhisattva practice, then there are very, very limiting times when one would actually take part in those practices. But even some of those, then there are occasions when skillful means allows for one to do physical things or speech things that one would not normally do, mentally not, right? So sometimes it might even be right to do like drink or whatever, you don't normally do that. But mentally to sort of go and say, oh, Buddhism's rubbish, is no good, never, right? So that would be a fatal flaw. So there are times when, as bodhisattvas, we are able to perform the deeds of other religions without any compunction at all, because what we're trying to do is to establish and encourage everybody, including ourselves, towards a better, more ethical, more mindful, more compassionate state of mind. So they say here, a perfect Buddha. So we're going to be talking a lot about Buddhahood. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's Lam Rim. So perfect Buddha has not just extinguished a portion of their faults, or have developed a mere portion of good qualities, but they've extinguished all faults and accomplished all good qualities. And therefore, we need to achieve this. And a part of that is not just us imagining in terms of realization. We think, oh, yeah, I'm going to do my which is a beautiful mantra. Oh, I'm going to sit here and actually thinking about what I'm going to have for supper tonight, and whether or not the neighbors sent me the parcel that was delivered by Amazon. I wonder if, oh God, I've got to remember to talk to my sister about something. And oh, my knee itches. Oh, I've got to go. I can't do this. Oh, and then before we know it, we're thinking about the film we watched last night, and it's even stopped. And that's not going to work for us, right? That's not what this is about. We can do our commitments with mindfulness, and sometimes we can't do them with mindfulness, but at the same time, what we're trying to do is to establish a change in us. And when we understand something, so for instance, we were talking earlier on about death. When we understand death, it's very easy to understand, you know, okay, how many people do we know that's 1 million years old? None, right? So we know we're not going to live that long, right? We're not going to live that long at all. None of us are. And yet we like to sort of imagine that, let's not worry about that right now, right? Let's not, I've got too many things to do. I've got to get this done, I've got to get that done. Oh, I can't deal with that. But the point about that is that when we realize that we're going to die, which happens sometimes, you can see it, when we have an illness or a cancer or a stroke or all sorts of things, or maybe our partner or our mother, and it happens, then suddenly it's right there in our face and we feel totally shocked. Okay, if you've had the experience, the difference between knowing you're going to die and realizing you're going to die is quite distinct. And what's amazing is when we have that realization, we actually generally find our minds become, well, we can end up very fearful, but we can also find ourselves feeling far more generous, far more able, far more forgiving of those around us. And those are some of the qualities that we develop if we're using it within the spiritual path. So, but the realization of death awareness isn't like something that hits us over the head like a great lightning bolt, or Buddha saying, "You now understand death." It doesn't work that way. It's because we see it, we feel it, we recognize it. It goes right through us, and it's not like some sort of spiritual thing. It's just the basic understanding that changes us and informs our life from moment to moment thereafter. But what happens is, because of our habits, because of our previous habits, let's say we have cancer and then it goes into remission, then what we tend to do is we find ourselves very gradually falling back into, oh, I don't need to worry about dying anymore, right? So this is this thing that we have this idea of generally going back into some sort of easygoing equilibrium. So the monks if you see a Buddhist monk, they have these Tibetan monk, they have these blue triangles here, and they represent the teeth of death. So there's all this thing at the time for them to remember, you're going to die, right? And it's not to be miserable. It's to say, keep that awareness. Make sure that you use the moments that you have to the best that you can. And that's the value of death awareness, is you suddenly see how precious, how rare, how incredibly rare this moment is. And that then is the realization that we're looking at. You don't get it from just sitting there and Buddha giving it to you, or a light shining. It doesn't work that way. Realization is making it real. That's all it means, making it real. And how does it change your life? It affects your life right there, right there. You won't do things. If you know your life is so precious, every moment counts, there are whole lots of things you just won't do anymore, right? So being enlightened is about recognizing the way things are, to the point where there are whole lots of activities you just wouldn't do. It's not as if we're having some sort of lightning rod going through us, or we suddenly see through walls or anything like that. It's actually a gentle, rare process that way, but it's not magical or spiritual in that sense. It's actually very is mental. It's direct and it's obvious. So when we're engaging in enlightening activity, we have to think about saying, our minds, our speech, and our actions, physical actions, what are we doing right now with them that helps us on that path? And sometimes it's very easy for us to get distracted or to run away, you know, run away and, oh, I've got 15 novels to read and they're all so good and whatever. Sometimes we can't do very much. So when we can't do very much, then it's like, well, the least we can do is non-harm, right? At least we can do is say, maybe I can't move forward very much right now, but at least I can try not to move backwards. Okay? And sometimes we can't even do that. Sometimes we're so filled with rage or fury or grief or just overwhelming emotion that we don't have that ability to say, you know. And in that sense, Geshe used to say, do what you can to just be like a cork on the ocean, on the sea. Just try your best to disengage, not in terms of saying, oh yeah, just let go, man, it's all right. The point is saying is that you don't want to push your energy into it as well. Keep your energy onto it. When we get furious, it's very easy to bind ourselves in with that fury. When we get terrified, it's very easy for us to bind ourselves into that fury, into that fear, into that terror. You know, it's really, really visceral. It's not like some sort of head game. And yet what we're wanting to do is to say, okay, let's try our best to recognize the body part of this and say, you know, this is just something I'm going through right now. Yeah? Just trying to find a way of being able to let go of it. And it's that sort of idea about saying, giving us the ability to start taking control over our negative emotions and giving us the ability to try to improve our positive emotions and our positive contributions to the world, even small ways. That this is what enlightening activity is. The better we get at it, the more enlightened we become, right? It's a gradual process. When we're able to make sure that whatever we do helps us in our enlightenment, every single thing that we do helps us in our enlightenment, and helps us with enlighten those around us by being a good example, by being responsible, by being good, showing good, being able to meet the needs of others from moment to moment. Who's to say we're not enlightened? Right? What's the difference? So it's not as if there's some sort of badge you get. It's work. But the point is, and this is the other thing that's so nice about it, is that as we do it, we find greater and greater joy. And that joy isn't like just the joy you get from having a good drink. It's a contentment in terms of being at peace with oneself and at peace with the world, really deep. And I'm not you can tell straight away, I'm not a sort of calm, sort of, you know, yes, and this is what, but having that peace, inner peace, is very, very deep. It's not just about being calm all the time, okay? It's about doing what's necessary. So I think it's a little bit early actually. That's one at 6:30 to 7:30. Okay. I'll carry on a little bit more then this time. But if it's too long, we'll talk about that later. Oops, so I jumped ahead. So sorry, this is like even just one sentence he said about bodhisattvas need to help with the paths of all, right? So again, this is like saying when we begin to actually develop a really strong understanding and ability of the path to enlightenment, then in terms of our minds, we see that as being the most valuable. And he talks about the Vajrasikara as again an Italian Sanskrit text, which says even to save your life, do not give up the spirit of enlightenment. I think that's really hard to do, especially when we're at our levels. But at the same time, it's not so much about saying we really are able to do that, but to remember the value of keeping that sort of mind. And but the deeds of the six perfections should never be cast aside. Is exactly right. This is the path that we choose, the path of enlightenment, the path of the three of developing our minds with ethical discipline and developing insight and understanding, there's no reason to throw them to one side. That's the path that we walk. That's the path to Buddhahood. That's the path to enlightenment. Okay, so again, also he talks quite a bit about Tantra here, and he says we need to uphold the three teachings, not just Mahayana and the Theravada tradition and the external schools, but also the Tantras. And one could argue that's interesting, Ben. Why is he talking about Tantra so much? Why is he quoting for Tantra? Why did he talk about Atisha being a tantric yogi when the Lam Rim is non-tantric? And the answer is, well, one of the main purposes of the Lam Rim Chenmo is because it's often used as a preliminary to tantric practice. And in fact, there are many parts of the way in which the structure of the Lam Rim Chenmo is written is congruent and concordant with developing an understanding of Tantra. In fact, it's very, very hard, I'd say impossible, to be able to enter onto the tantric path without having developed a significant renunciation, bodhicitta, and insight. And these three qualities are what the Lam Rim Chenmo is very, very much about helping us with. So we're really saying that essentially it's not necessary for us to take Tantra. It's certainly not correct for us to reject Tantra, just for the same reason it's not right for us to reject Islam. But the point about it also is that it actually enables us to enter into Tantra. Now, Tantra isn't sex. It's not the modern Western idea of Tantra is based upon teachings mainly by Rajneesh in the 1960s, that it's somehow all about sex yoga and sex massage and, you know, feel my yoni sort of thing, which it's not. And it's not really even about, and a lot of it's about, you know, oh, well, you've got your chakras and you've got to do chakra dances, and it's not relevant. None of that's relevant. Tantra's not like that. Tantra's just another way, it's another tool for developing the same stuff that you have in the Lamrim. They're not separate, they're the same. So when we understand Lamrim, we have a very good ability for us to understand Tantra. And that allows us then to enhance some of those practices in terms of really one of the main values of Tantra is it helps us to really develop a 24-hour continuity, moment by moment, right, of our practice. And that's what it's called. Tantra, the word, means thread, yeah? And the whole point about it is it helps us to establish a thread of our practice from every single moment, a continuity of our practice. That's what Tantra is about. Okay, so you have to ignore the yab-yum sex stuff that you see or hear. It's not really about that. But what we're looking at here is what the thread is, right? If you don't know what your practice is, keeping a thread of it doesn't mean anything. So we have to definitely study beforehand, or learn and develop our own skills in this before we can even think about developing this thread. We need to know what it is we're dealing with. So in the Geluk tradition, our tradition, the preliminaries to a tantric initiation are the Lamrim, right? That's instead of some of the other traditions. For instance, you have to do maybe 100,000 prostrations, or you have to do 100,000 mandalas, or you have to give 100,000 pounds to your lama, or whatever. We don't do that. We say you need to learn Lamrim. And the reason is because it actually is what the practice is about. There are practices, we do practices in some retreats where, yeah, you do 100,000, also do 100,000 mandalas and 100,000 prostrations. It's not like we don't do them or we reject them, but the entry to Tantra requires understanding of Lamrim, and not just, brain, intellect, but experience. So again, he says, this time he's quoting the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 Lines, which modern scholars, from what I remember, say is one of the oldest Mahayana wisdom texts of all of the world, and many people say that this was the one which all Perfection of Wisdom sutras were based on. But the verse summary of the Perfection of Wisdom of 8,000 lines says, the path of all the Buddhas of the past, of all of the Buddhas who have not yet come, and all of the Buddhas of today, is the perfections and nothing else. The path of perfections is the center point that leads us to Buddhahood. Normally we talk about 6 perfections. We've only got 6 perfections. There we are. And they are generosity, ethical behavior, effort, patience, tolerance, right? Effort, concentration, wisdom, right? Now, within the scope of Geshe taught this to me many times. He said, all of Buddha's teachings, all of the Path to Enlightenment, are the 3 higher trainings. Now, there's lots of numbers and things very Buddhist, right? But it helps us to keep grasp of what they are. The 3 higher trainings are found in every tradition of Buddhism. Tantra, Mahayana, Theravada, Zen, doesn't matter. Wherever you go, whatever it is, the 3 higher trainings. The 3 higher trainings really is Buddhism. Yeah? It's the 4th of the 4 Noble Truths. Is the 3 Noble Truths. Even the Eightfold Path, which is talked about, is the 3 higher trainings dressed up as 8 points. Okay? And within the 6 perfections, they're also the 3 higher trainings. So the 3 higher trainings are ethical, meditation, concentration, and an insight, right? Meditation, concentration, as we say, really is samatha. In Sanskrit, it's called samatha. So a calm mind. So the training in ethical discipline, then samatha, and then insight, wisdom. And the basis is that you can't really develop the level of concentration you need without the ethical discipline. You can't develop the strength of the wisdom needed to cut through your self-grasping without the concentration. So these are the 3 higher trainings. And in the 6 perfections, the perfection of generosity and tolerance, patience, and ethical discipline, these are the 3 that belong to the first, or sila, or ethical. And then joyous effort and concentration belong to the second, and then wisdom belongs to the third. So that's how the 3 higher trainings are addressed as the 6 perfections, right? So I'm not so good at the Eightfold Path, but basically it's the same sort of thing. They're very easy to divide them. There are lots of resources for that. It's easy to find. So we can say clearly that, you know, the path of Mahayana practitioner is these 3, and in this particular case, the sutra is talking about it in terms of the 6 perfections, because it's normal for the Mahayana to do that. Okay. So one of the things that he mentions in terms of this, we're going through basically the greatnesses we talked about earlier on, about why this is such a great quality text. And this was part of understanding that all the scriptures are the instructions of practice, right? What we're also doing, and also the teachings are free of contradiction, is what we did earlier, where we talked about saying how everything really belongs to the path to enlightenment. That's its purpose. So then he talks very briefly about the greatness of enabling one to understand the conqueror's intent. And he makes the point here, he says, you know, look, actually the sutras and the commentaries, they're amazing instructions, but they're not easy to follow. In fact, if you pick up a sutra, and many of you may have done this, picked up a sutra and tried to read it, it's not easy. In fact, nowadays, picking up the Lam Rim and trying to read it isn't easy. It's not an easy task, especially because while the translation is excellent, it's still basically a 14th century text, and it gets quite easy to miss what the core pith points are in it. I've known people who are very sincere practitioners who've really struggled with it. I would have struggled deeply with it had I not had this this experiential teaching from Geshe. And that's why I'm so grateful to him for it. You know, I really feel he gave me the ability to understand what's going on. So the point about he talks about the lamp of the path, but also the Lam Rim in a sense, is that it provides the key points in an order, in a graceful order, which helps us to really pinpoint how the whole thing works. It's rather like saying, okay, if you read the sutras, it's like a huge jigsaw puzzle, but all the pieces are all over the place. And what the Lam Rim does is it puts them together and shows you the picture, right? So it does that. There are many different ways of doing that, but what they do really, in a sense, is being able to provide a vision, a solution of an appearance of that jigsaw, which is for us able to see how it all works together. And one of the things in this text is there are occasionally where Lama Tsongkhapa does get involved in forward referencing, where he talks about something that isn't yet to discuss, but very rarely. So he's thought really carefully about how to lay out and how to present the teachings. Now, the last point, and the last point really was important here, was to do with saying how we look at the ability of one to refrain from great wrongdoing. So Lama Tsongkhapa mentions here the sutra gathering all threads. I think maybe I should not bother trying to do all the Sanskrit, but Sarvavadhyala Samgraha Sutra says, Manjushri, the karmic obstruction of abandoning the excellent teaching is subtle. Manjushri, whoever distinguishes some of the words spoken by the Buddha as good and some as bad, has abandoned the teaching. One who abandons the teaching by having abandoned it deprecates the Buddha and speaks badly of the community. So when we say this is reasonable, this is unreasonable, this was set forth for the sake of bodhisattvas, and this is set forth for the Theravadins, then you abandon the teaching. And it's this point here that we have to say we need to recognize the value of all of the sutras of Buddha, all the teachings of Buddha and other teachers, other spiritual traditions, and recognize what they are there for and how they are there for, the context with which they're there for, and the value that they have. And that's how we can begin to start letting go of our strong grasping at this, that, and start saying, oh, that's political, that's this, that's that, and so on, right? What we're thinking about is beyond all that. We're not interested in, even if it were true that this was polemic and this was that and this is that, it doesn't help us. And this is really the main point, is to say, we could say, okay, well, actually, scholars such and such Buddhologists have pointed out that really this is quite clearly a polemic attack by such and such a sutra is really not, or even Buddha's sutra, would guarantee this was Buddha's sutra and he was critical about this or that or the other. It doesn't help our practice. It doesn't inform us to go down that route. And what's more important to us, knowing whether or not a particular sutra is done for some sort of purpose, or for us to develop our minds into a way which opens us and gives us the enlightenment that we're looking for, and helps everybody around us. So in terms of an activity, it's like we need to find ourselves. We need to find in ourselves the ability to say, what really matters here? What matters here is that we become better people, not that we become great scholars, right? It's very simple. Truth is mutable. Everybody knows that you give any piece of text for who is it? Some intellectual said every reading is a rewriting. Everybody will come with their own interpretation. So it doesn't really necessarily matter what the objective truth is. What matters is how we use that truth to inform us, to make us better people. And I'm not saying, therefore, that His Holiness, Buddha or His Holiness or the Lama Tsongkhapa has made mistakes and I'm somehow covering it up. What I'm saying is it doesn't matter. What matters is that we actually follow our practice. We take ownership of our practice. Buddha wrote, both in the Theravada and the Mahayana traditions, it doesn't matter where you go, Buddha said in the end, you have to look to yourself. take the path within yourself. He didn't make it up yourself. He's saying is you can't rely upon others or others' opinions. You've got to know your own journey. You've got to know your own mind. You've got to develop that yourself, right? So whatever I can give, whatever I can do to help or facilitate, in the end, you're the one who still has to do your job, right? I have to do my job. And maybe from this you think, oh, that then what a waste of time. Absolutely, that's absolutely fine. For me, it's great. You know, I'm so inspired by being able to share this with you and take part. It improves my practice so much. So I'm really grateful to you all for being here, because it helps me develop my own practice, and it recommits me to what it is that matters most. Yeah. So I'm really grateful. I'm really, really grateful that we're all able to take part. I'm hoping through this that we can all grow from it, right? I'm really hoping for that, and I'm hoping that essentially as a part of this, we can make use of working together as a group, or as, you know, it's fine. If you can't make it, you can't do it. If it doesn't suit you, that's absolutely fine. So that it's not like there's any expectations. But if we want to say, here's an opportunity, we have such a short amount of time left in our lives, here's an opportunity, maybe once a week, have a group, share, listen to Ben gabble for a bit, but we can think about becoming better people, really making a difference in our lives. And what I'm talking about, what I'm sharing, is brilliant. There's no doubt about it, regardless of how bad I am. So, okay, so I think I've got 10 minutes of talking. Then what I'm hoping to do is I'm going to open up the for discussion after 10 minutes, and you're absolutely free to go. But if you want to discuss, I think maybe I might take a couple of minutes break, but that's all. And then we can just open up and discuss among us how to take this forward and how we can make most use of it. All right. So I'm really open to that. What I would like to suggest is, and that if you are inspired to come back, and I hope you are, that you start thinking about taking on or continuing your daily practice, and especially in terms of meditating on the topics of Lam Rim. So in this sense is the idea of what we've been covering so far, in terms of setting our minds to Buddhahood, setting our minds in terms of bodhicitta, and thinking of all, becoming better people, using an opportunity that we have available to us, recognizing the importance as a bodhisattva of all traditions, learning and thinking about how we might wish to discourse, or what sort of issues we might have with that. And then, and also just, you know, basic concentration, simple stuff. So what I found incredibly useful, and I will definitely be using it again this time, is when I'm taking on an additional daily practice, is to have I use something that, like what you use for children, a stamp chart, right? Daily stamp, did I do it? And if I get 7 days done, then I give myself a little reward, maybe a chocolate or something else. It doesn't have to be hard. But the point is what I've found is when I've got that stamp done for 3 years, I'm amazed, right? When I get even done for a month, it's like I've got a whole month of practice done, and it's there, you know. It's just like a little tick. But being able to see it is really useful for our practice initially, especially when we're trying to take something else on. And this is, again, straight from Lam Rim. Geshe Bendawa, this comes later on. Geshe Bendawa, who was originally he was a crook, he was a bandit, and then he became a monk, and there's many stories about him. And one of them was very much how he started off, at the end of each day, what he did is he had a bunch of black stones and white stones, and he had 2 bowls, 1 bowl, and he'd go through the day recollecting what practices he'd done and which practice he hadn't really been bothered with, you know, where he'd really just nom, 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 nom. And if he didn't do it well, he put a black stone in, and if he felt he did it well, he put a white stone in. Right? If he didn't do it at all, he'd put a black stone in, and everyone was laughing a little bit. You know, it's like him and his stones. It was like, yeah, but after 10 years, he said it was amazing. For the first year, it was like just black stones. I couldn't get my practice right. I couldn't keep my practice, and gradually, he said there was more and more white stones, and now there's no black stones in my bowl, right? So this is not me making it up. Yeah, sure. Doing a stamp chart is my version of Geshe Bendawa's black stones, white stones. That's all. So it's really worthwhile saying, okay, well, let's think about this. Can I improve my practice? Am I a Buddha? Maybe not. Maybe I can improve my practice then, right? Maybe I can find an hour a week, and we can take part in this together. And as a community, we can work together to improve our practice just a little bit. I'm not expecting anything huge, right? But anything is better than nothing. Okay, right? And if we can't do it, it doesn't matter. It's not like I'm going to say you didn't do what I said, right? It's up to you what you do, not up to me. And if you come here just to have me drone on and you get a nice sort of fall asleep, that's fine too, right? I don't mind. Okay. So I think that's enough for today, really. I'm going to, I think we're still done. So what I want to do is finish just basically with a short meditation, and then we'll open up the discussion if that's all right with you all. So the meditation today we're going to do is a normal one, is a dedication meditation, and then we'll do a concentration one. So the dedication is basically, the idea of dedication, for those of you who are not so familiar with it, is to say when we do something good, when we've used our mind, listening, teaching, meditating, or doing practice, both outward or inward practice, then that benefit is available to us. If we dedicate it, it seals it. So the traditional idea is to say, if you don't seal it, then the karma can be destroyed by a moment of anger, right? The benefit of that karma actually is weaker over time. But if we seal it, then it's sealed against something specific. So there are four, within the Lamrim tradition, I know there are four basic principal dedications, 3 outer and 1 inner, or outward facing, 1 inner facing one. The 3 outward ones are to the enlightenment of all sentient beings, right? All beings at all, to make sure they're as happy as they can possibly be. This is one of the dedications. The other dedication is for the long life of the Dharma, so that the Buddha Dharma continues to spread and grow. The third one is the long life of our teachers, and this can be all teachers, but generally we're talking about our Dharma teachers. And on that note, you don't have to consider me a Dharma teacher if you feel uncomfortable about that. It's absolutely fine. I don't want to be a guru, so we're friends, right? We're just guides, and we're just helping each other, right? So in that sense, there's no need for you to think, because I've listened to Ben, I have to think of him as my teacher, right? You don't have to at all. But you might say, well, he's holiness, I'd like him to live longer. That's much better. And then fourthly, the one inner one is my own enlightenment, my Buddhahood. Now, of those four, the most important one and the greatest value is actually my own enlightenment. And the reason for that is because that's me personally taking responsibility for that journey. Not just me thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if all sentient beings were there, and I give this merit to all. It's actually saying, I'm sacrificing my individuality, my suffering, my misery, to become a Buddha, to benefit all directly. And then that way, actually saying, I dedicate my merit, any merit that I've made at all towards becoming a Buddha, is a beautiful dedication to give, right? Because it helps everybody. It helps to prolong the Dharma. It helps to make our teachers happy and content and brings them long life. But it's up to us. That's really, those are the four that's available to us. So first of all, we just want to dedicate and I'm just saying I dedicate any benefit from this towards my becoming a Buddha, for the benefit of all sentient beings. that I may use every moment I have towards achieving enlightenment, that I may be free of my wrong views, my wrong actions, and be able to do the right thing at every moment I can. I think that's about as good as I can do. Okay, so now let's do a short silent meditation.